So continuing the story of unnumbers, we saw that 7, if I have 7 blocks, or 7 of anything, there's no way I can group that. And that's very different from 6, which I could group into 2s or into 3s. Well, let's start making a little table. And this is the way I did it with my son, is sitting down and experimenting, just, without any particular purpose in mind, just kind of making a list and seeing, well, what numbers are groupable, they're grouping numbers, and which ones are ungroupable, the unnumbers. And so we could start, well, 1 is kind of special, because there's kind of no way that you could ever group that. It doesn't even make sense to even try. There's not more than 1 to group together. This guy's just bound to be lonely anyway you slice it. So that's kind of special, and we don't really want to worry about that. But and then 2. Well, 2, it's not just 1. There I have a pair. But is there any way to actually group those into groups that have more than one guy? Because that's the only interesting kind of grouping there is. Well, as soon as I split these apart into 2 groups, each of the groups just has 1 guy. So they're just lonely in their groups. So that means there's no way to group these. If you think about making a rectangle, this isn't really a rectangle. If I think about the dots, that's not really a rectangle, that's just a little line of dots. And so that doesn't really count. So 2 is going to be an unnumber. That's a G. Boom. So we found the smallest unnumber. That's 2. So just hiding there in the simplest number besides 1 was one of these funky unnumbers. Now we could go on to 3. Okay, well, now 3, you can start to try to group it. It's not silly to even try. You can group these guys into 2, but then this guy's lonely. Well, you could group those guys into 2. Now this guy's lonely. Uh-oh. Let's see. Well, let's try to make the rectangles, okay? I'm going to try to make a rectangle, like maybe a little square, a 2 by 2 square. Oops. Doesn't work. Nope. Okay, that doesn't count because that's just a line of dots again. If I try to make it a nice chunky rectangle, there's just not a way to do it. Cool. That is another unnumber. Or, if you want to use the real math terminology, prime number. But you know what? Make up your own name. Make up your own name for these guys because they're so cool. Now, what about 4? Well, you know what? Take a look at what I got for 3. How do I make 4? Think about that. 4 is the next number. I just got to bring in 1 more. And look. Oh, it slots in so nicely. That is a rectangle. It's a square, in fact. But that's a special kind of rectangle. So that's an important thing to realize, is that squares are going to be super cool. I might do another video about square numbers and their friends. And that definitely, I count that as a rectangle. And it's certainly 2 groups of 2. If you actually put in the circles again, or the ovals, that's 2 groups of 2. No doubt about it. Now, let's see. Squares are kind of funny, because if I do that turning trick to try to figure out another way to group it, well, that's not really different. If I do the ovals this way, yeah, that's still 2 groups of 2. I've changed who everybody's partner is, but it's still 2 groups of 2. But hey, at least it groups. So that's the first groupable number. 5. Let's think about that one. Why don't you think about it for a second? Okay. I hate to leave a lot of blank space, dead space in the video, but the way we did it was I didn't tell him any of this stuff. Not a bit. Not any bit. We just started playing with stuff, and we started asking the question, did they group? That was it. And he came up with the rest pretty much. And I don't think there's anything special about that. I think that most kids can come up with this if you give them enough time. Well, let me bring in 5 here. Okay, so play along at home with Cheerios or pennies or anything that you have, a few of that are identical copies. Okay, that's not a rectangle. And let's see, what does that really mean? I'm trying to group it into 2s, basically, if you look at the rows here. Doesn't work. There's an extra. Can I group it in 3s? Well, you know what? There's a 3, and oh, not enough to make 3. Can I group it into 4s? Not even close. Okay. Steffi didn't even, my son didn't even try that, I don't think, because he could see, and most kids can see. 5 is not going to group into 4s. There's just not even close to enough left over. And so that's an unnumber. And so we're starting to see that some numbers are unnumbers and some aren't. 6 we already did. that groups. Oh, I'm gonna record the result here. 2 groups of 2. That's in pictorial dot notation. If I want a notation that's a little bit more advanced, but not much. The way I'm going to say 2 groups of 2 is I'm going to write down the number for how many groups there are, and a little x. And that really you can read as 2 groups of 2. And the little x, for some reason, later to be determined, stands for groups of. 2 groups of 2. And this one was 3 groups of 2, or 2 groups of 3. And there's a symbol for when you have this 2 different descriptions of a number that give you just the same number. It's called the equal sign. And this you would read as 3 groups of 2 is the same as 2 groups of 3. And again, if you're a parent or somebody watching this, and you're thinking, okay, kids got to understand multiplication and algebra or arithmetic, like 4th grade stuff, to even read that. That's not true. You can just tell a 4-year-old this means groups of, this means is the same as. They won't be real confident with using it, but they'll be able to recognize it and just fold that into what they know about what basic letters and numbers mean. Okay. Oh, and I wrote a G instead of a 6 because I was already thinking about 6. Ha! About grouping. That's a G. That's a 6 rather, and there's a G, but it's not a coincidence. Okay, so 7. I guess it is a coincidence that those look so the same. 7 was our first unnumber. That was something that did not group. Okay. And let's just do one more, maybe 8. Because maybe I'll finish off with a really cool thing that's not exactly about unnumbers versus not unnumbers. So let's see, I need one more. Let's just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When I was doing this with my son, a lot of it was just he just would always recount them every time, and that's just great practice in basic counting, and it was fun. So let's see. Probably the basic thing to do, what he always tries to do when he's asked about grouping, is try to group them in 2s. He does this with his breakfast cereal too. Okay, it groups in 2s. That's true. Okay, so good. So it groups. That's the first thing we can say. And it groups into 2s. I'll write the little 4 groups of 2 there. Just a kind of a dot picture of what we see there. And we want to make it a nice tidy rectangle. Ah, that's so pretty. Okay. But wait a minute. Does it group into 3s? Okay. Well, there's the 3. There's 3. Uh-oh. No, it doesn't group into 3s. Okay. So here's 6 was something that grouped into 2s and 3s. But 8 groups into 2s but not into 3s. Does it group into 4s? We haven't found anything that groups into 4s yet. Oh, yes. It's 2 groups of 4. Oh, wait, that's not an accident. Because remember, it was 4 groups of 2, like that. Stack it together and rotate it. Take it apart again. That's 2 groups of 4. 4 groups of 2 is a rectangle that's 4 on one side and 2 on the other. That's 2 groups of 4. Anything else? Well, let's see. 5s. 5 and a 3. No, that doesn't work. And as soon as you get to there, it's like, oh, no, that's just silly. Because 6 and 2, this isn't even close. 7 and 1, no, doesn't work. So those are the only ways it groups, except here's a really cool thing to do. You can take that 2 groups of 4 and think of it as 2 groups of 2. So here's like one preschool class with 2 pairs of friends, and here's another classroom, another room with 2 pairs in it. That's 2 big groups, and each of the big groups is 2 small groups, and each of the small groups has 2 in it. There's a way to write that down. 2 groups of 2 groups of 2. And that's the first one that we found, and it is the first one that has that kind of thing, where you can say groups of groups of. 2 groups of 2 groups of 2. There's an even cooler thing. Going into 3 dimensions, I can make it into a cube. Because each of the top and the bottom layers is 2 groups of 2. I just made those into rectangles, and then I used that to make this. Done.